Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. During this series, we're talking with Susan Mizruchi, editor of a new book published by Springer Nature called Libraries and Archives in the Digital Age. Susan is a William Arrowsmith Professor in the Humanities at Boston University. She's also director of BU's Center for the Humanities and a professor of English. This series is brought to you by Springer Nature. Susan's book is a uniquely collaborative volume. It brings together contributions from librarians, library directors, and academic scholars that explore the impact the digital era has had on the collection and maintenance of scholarly and communal output in 4 distinct areas: access, preservation, archival politics, and the profession. While the book provides a wealth of information on the opportunities and challenges digital technology presents for scholarly and archival content, it also shines a bright light on the areas of occupational overlap among academics, librarians, and digital professionals, revealing how important, productive, and rewarding collaboration within an institutional structure can be. In this second episode, Susan and I talk about the working relationships between librarians, researchers, and faculty. So, Professor Clancher from Carnegie Mellon University, who contributed a testimonial to your book, as he sort of describes how well conceived the book is, he notes the, quote, overlapping professional agendas among academics, librarians, and digital specialists. And I'm wondering where you might see those commonalities that he's pointing to.
Yeah, well, I do talk about this in the introduction, and I guess what I would say is that for all of us, for academics, for librarians, for digital specialists, I think right now, the expansion and acceleration of digital methods, for keeping and storing our sort of collective social and cultural resources, I think they force us to address fundamental questions of value. Mm-hmm. And I think that, this question of how and what to preserve, is, something that, it's on the one hand, it seems very simple, but it's not. And and it comes down to really, really, simple, issues and recognitions, it was, I will say too, an issue that came up a lot in our on our panels, all of the panels. For example, issues of keeping archives and providing access to archives. Are fundamentally political, especially, when you look at them from, the perspective of historians who work on Latin America, people who were disappeared, you can't disappear a person without, disappearing, records and documents, of their existence. And I think these issues are also obviously highly relevant to a context like, the People's Republic of China. We have a contribution on just the whole process of censorship there. And, mm-hmm. I think too, I actually had not known much about community archives when I began organizing this forum. And it was very exciting, for me to hear from Jeanette Bastian about, just the role of community archives in sort of identity building and the ways in which the methods, of that, particular area, tend to cut across traditions. And actually that's, something I'd be happy to talk about more. But I think that the questions that unite us, all of people who are working in academic institutions, in nonprofit and governmental institutions, even commercial institutions, are very basic ones. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they really come to sort of the core of, as I said before, this question of what we value and also of what we're allowed, to value.
Hmm.
But one thing I didn't mention, and I do think it's central to the Digital Public Library of America, which Robert Darnton, one of our contributors, and also Dan Cohen, they were both on the founding group of. And I think this issue of access, open access, is something that engages all of our contributors and all the people who were panelists at the forum. And I think what I would say, I mean, it's really about, the sharing of the wealth of knowledge, and the digital bounty, that we've created, increasingly, in our culture with larger numbers of people across the world. And I think that too is a subject, a fundamental one that that sort of unites, all of the contributors, and that everyone is sort of thinking about and foregrounding.
Right. So you've noted that a central theme of the book is the relationships librarians have with researchers and faculty. So I'm wondering, after compiling the book, if you could tell us a little bit more about that theme. What have you learned along the way from the forum to the completion of the book about those relationships?
I guess probably the most important thing is how eager both sides are to engage with each other. I when I reached out, as I said before, to people at libraries across Boston, people who worked in different archives, they were so receptive, to
Right.
the idea of partnering with academics and sharing ideas and debating the ethical issues that we're all constantly confronted with. And I mean, one of my favorite pieces. It's a relatively short piece, but it's by BU's head librarian for digital initiatives, Jack Ammerman. I mean, he's retired recently, but he talks about. He uses a term from Nicholas Negroponte, our new, he refers to our new information superhighway,
Mhm.
but one of the things that he was very alert to and very sort of straightforward about is just how, we need, creating the kinds of maps that we need for navigating our new information superhighway are ones that, that require the collaboration, require many hands and many minds and many professional capacities. And they, and it's and that's that sort of perspective, that kind of observation came up a lot, that it's sort of like, you don't go to war with half and leave half the army at home, that it's inevitable now that
Mhm.
faculty and staff and administrators, but that library professionals and the faculty doing research need to share and pool their skills and their knowledge bases, and also I would say that it's I think it's inevitable that people at different kinds of archives need to work together. I mean, one of my favorite conversations at our forum was between David Wexler, is head of this incredible state of the art archive in Hollywood called Hollywood Vaults. It's in Los Angeles, and it's a commercial archive that I worked at when I was doing the Brando book, because Brando's estate keeps all of his papers there. And
Hmm.
Wexler just has all of these amazing contacts across the country and the world, for storage, because he stores the materials of some of the most famous people in the world,
Hmm.
and Francis Ford Coppola, Michael Jackson's estate, all of those people. And at one point, he was talking to Tom Blake of the Boston Public Library about helping the BPL with some of their storage needs, because he had a site, I think, someplace in the Midwest where they had some space, and
Yeah.
he helped arrange, for that. I mean, there were sort of, I mean, that's a kind of collaboration and engagement, that was just very very exciting to me. And so I guess what I would say is I just saw a tremendous eagerness, on the part of all of these different people, from different places,
Mhm.
different professional capacities, to share and talk. And, it seemed inevitable that they recognized the common enterprise that we're all engaged in.
Right, right. So in the introduction to the book, you note that it focuses on two kind of overarching notions. One is, quote, the political urgency of archival decision making in a global context, and more local institutional considerations, particularly issues of professional status and economic compensation that arise among the staff, faculty, public servants, and administrators in various academic, governmental, and philanthropic settings. Can you talk about that political urgency, as you put it, as well as issues around status and compensation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think these are somewhat different, issues, and
Right.
I mean, the issue of political urgency is, connected to what I was talking about before,
Mm.
in highlighting, the special straits of, people in Latin American countries, where there's been a kind of wiping out of archives, and with it, the extinguishing, of people's existences, and this just happened under the Latin American dictatorships. And Kirsten Weld's essay in our collection, is about that, and she also has a book called Paper Cadavers, which is about archives in Guatemala, and how this evolved. And one of the issues that people who work on Latin America are dealing with is, now that these dictatorships are passed, for the most part, how do you go about the hard work of repairing sort of collectivities and communities, whose rights and even existences were extinguished. And so one of the things they think about is the role that archives themselves can play
Hmm.
in restoring democratic values and instincts. And I mean, I think the meaning of a term like political urgency is sort of, just implicit in this hope that, archives themselves, locating them and introducing people to records and documents that they thought were lost, can really help to sort of restore, democratic instincts in civically blighted countries. So that's one way of thinking about political urgency. Another is, I think of Rudolf Wagner's piece. That's the piece I was mentioning before on the Communist Party's censorship of internet communication, and social media in China. And that's a very sad case in a lot of ways, because there was this hope that, on the part of people who work on sort of internet issues and archives, information specialists. There's a hope that, with the kind of economic opening of China, and the expansion of capitalist enterprise there would be a kind of parallel expansion of public exchange, and just much greater access to worldwide information systems, for Chinese citizens. And in fact, that the sad thing has been that's not the case. That in fact, capitalist development in China seemed readily reconciled with greater control
Yeah.
and censorship. And so, that's a situation too, where the political urgency of issues of access, becomes especially pronounced. When we're talking about institutions and how they operate, that's it's a different subject. And I guess, the type of institution, obviously I'm most familiar with, from a sort of lifetime is academic. And I guess what I would say is, I do think that there is a real problem with, and it's something that we have a few essays on sort of the experience of librarians and questions of institutional valuing of the work they do, increasingly,
Mhm.
and their sort of increasingly significant role in research, in designing research projects and expanding opportunities for scholars. And I think that issues of status and compensation, for academic librarians is just an ongoing and very sort of tenacious problem. And, um, I think it's a problem, for staff in general at universities, but I think, librarians in particular, partly because all this innovation that's going on, around digitization, all the skills, that librarians have to learn, all the tools that they have to, be up to date on. It just ever increasing. I
Yep.
mean, the demand for innovation is endless, and at the same time, I think that what I would say about librarians too is that they're increasingly playing pedagogical roles. I mean, this is something that Harriet Green talks about in her essay. They're teachers, and they're teaching our students and our undergrads, our graduate students, and our faculty. What they're doing is amassing, tremendous, amounts of skills on, themselves, and then transmitting them, disseminating them, in the university at large. And, all of this is it's
Yep.
essential if universities are going to keep up with, the way that scholarship and research is evolving, and, be in the game, our librarians have to keep up with all this innovation. But the, compensation has just lagged far behind that, and there's,
Mhm.
there needs to be a recognition of just how much time it takes. And,
Yeah.
I guess one thing I would, argue, and again, it seems obvious, but it's also, I think librarians need leave. They need time, fellowships,
Yeah.
for librarians to study and to learn and to, acquire these state of the art knowledges that we all depend on them to have.
Hmm. Exactly.
And but I guess one of the things I really do fear about and I think that this is something too that we could talk about more. But one thing I fear about our current moment and all of the sort of economic anxieties and stresses, that have arisen from this pandemic, is that I just really worry that we're going to be back to square one. I mean, I do feel that, many institutions were making some progress in recognizing, this fact about the role of librarians and, the need for greater compensation and time and, recognition of the expanded roles. But I fear that, the worst thing that could happen would be a kind of rollback,
Right.
especially right now, because I think
Yeah.
our pandemic has also made us increasingly dependent on remote access.
Exactly. And I think to that point, I think in some limited cases, some libraries are finding that uh, the pandemic has kind of opened up a new opportunity, especially with the remote learning setup and sort of this new broader reliance on digital resources. I think a lot of faculty and other departments within the institutions have been recognizing or suddenly learning about all of these resources and the things that librarians are providing and doing for them, and that librarians in certain cases are capitalizing on that and to sort of benefit themselves
Yeah,
and then prove the value back up the into the administration.
yeah,
But I think you're right, though. There's awful lot of focus on budget cuts, and things of that nature that might set us back a little bit.
yeah, yeah. No, it's so obvious that digitization it's just been a godsend,
Hmm.
for so many scholars at this moment, and
Yep.
at the Humanities Center, we have fellows, doing research in different areas of the world. And, we had a graduate student in our fellows seminar this fall who, had research she had to do in Egypt. And, the archives she needed are closed in Egypt. They're not accessible, by digitization. And so,
Mhm.
she's out of luck. She's
Yeah.
got to wait. And we had another scholar working in Germany with the same story. And others who have, who have experienced the miracle of digital access, can just continue on their merry way, and
Yeah.
the way that digitization, has shrunk our world and, made us, all neighbors, I suppose, in more ways than one, it's something, to celebrate endlessly. But it's, and, I think it's really a wonderful thought that, the pandemic can make us more appreciative of that.
Hmm.
But again, it's, whenever you hear about belt tightening, you get nervous because somehow it seems that humanities and libraries are,
Yeah. It's true.
I don't know why,
Yeah.
especially vulnerable.
You just heard from Susan Mizruchi, who edited Libraries and Archives in the Digital Age. Susan is a William Arrowsmith Professor in the Humanities at Boston University. She's also Director of BU's Center for the Humanities and a Professor of English. This series is brought to you by Springer Nature. Join us next week when we continue our conversation and talk about our digital future, the evolution and politics of preservation, and how librarians are coming to the rescue.
But I think another issue here too is that there's a dark side to our information age. I mean, the expansion of information of the internet, of our various sites, it's led to kind of troubling developments like hacking, the rise of pornography. I mean, archives, any group can have an archive. Any group can, exchange, information, media messages in innovative ways. And our innovations have led to dark and even oppressive, developments too. So I do think he's confronting, these kinds of counter movements.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.